really enjoyed the series, the first 2 episodes that I got to see. Kind of made me think of like Da Vinci Begins, sort of Batman Begins, but Da Vinci. Was that kind of the idea?
Jokingly, that's what we called it when we were developing it.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about developing the series.
But Batman Begins, it has alliteration in it, and Da Vinci Begins doesn't, hence Da Vinci's Demons, which is alliteration, because I think alliteration is good for a title. I was approached by Jane Tranter and Julie Gardner, who are now with Adjacent Productions, formerly BBC Worldwide. They were interested in doing specifically foreign co-productions, you know, with half the money from Europe and half the money from America. And historical things tend to do well overseas and port well overseas, so they said, would you ever consider doing something historical? And I said, well, let me think about it, and we talked about who, and I said, what about Da Vinci? You know, the most recognized figure in history other than Christ, purportedly, and yet, you know, he had never been the lead in his own movie or TV show. He'd always been a bit player in other stories. Right. And they liked the idea, and that's how it started. Was Da Vinci a subject that had always sort of fascinated you? I'd been interested in him. I mean, even as a kid, I remember early, 9, 10, reading somewhere when I was reading comic books that Bob Kane had based the design of Batman's cape on Leonardo's ornithopter, and I thought that was really cool. So even before I knew that he painted The Last Supper or the Mona Lisa, I just knew that Batman was kind of based on him, so I thought that was neat. Well, and what kind of research did you do? Any sort of ton of research? Okay, tons. Then once we set the show up, I did, I don't know, maybe 2 months of research. I went to Florence and I just read any and everything I could and immersed myself in it, made a bunch of notes, set it aside, and then wrote what is the first episode. I'm calling it a historical fantasy. I mean, a great deal of it is based on history. Most of the characters in the show were historical figures. A lot of the events are historically accurate, but there is a certain amount of invention, and there's a reason why one of the characters in the first few minutes of the show says history is a lie. Is I'm deliberately telling the audience we're going to mess with you. History is interpretive. It's written by the winners. So just because you think you know how the story ends doesn't necessarily mean you do. Well, in the first 2 episodes, obviously, we see, as you mentioned, we see the flying machine, we see that stuff, and I think even in the second one, he starts to play with guns, machine guns. Yeah. Is all of that historically accurate, or did you? And what other kind of, for lack of a better term, bat gadgets do we have coming up? In the first season, the diving suit, the giant catapult, explosive bombard. You know, quite a few. I mean, they're kind of sort of the candy of the show, but yeah, I mean, he invented a ton of things. One of the things that's also cool is he supposedly, at the time of his death, he had maybe 13,000 notebook pages in existence, and within a few years of his death, 7,000 of those pages went missing. So in the 6,000 pages that we do have, we know he invented the submarine and the machine gun and the diving suit and the ornithopter and the aerial screw, which people say is sort of the, you know, the predecessor to the helicopter and things like that. Well, those all exist within the 6,000 pages that we know of, and I think it's reasonable to extrapolate that in the 7,000 pages that have gone missing, he probably invented a bunch of other things as well, and that's kind of where the show lives, is in those pages. I imagine a pivotal part of making this series work and casting was casting Tom. Da Vinci. Tell me about casting Tom Riley. Tom was an unknown to me. He'd been in a number of Tom Stoppard plays and some UK television. We'd been casting a lot of people. We saw over 500 people, and it's no small feat to cast the greatest genius of all time. Tom came in and he just imbued all these characteristics that I was hoping to have Da Vinci would imbue. He was funny, he was smart, he was a little bit crazy, he was a little bit scary, and Tom just had all of these characteristics. And fortunately, at least for an American audience, I said to Starz, Da Vinci's the star. That's the high concept. So we don't necessarily need to go with, you know, a household name that American audiences are familiar with, and they embraced that, and Tom came in. I think Tom's going to be a major star. He's an incredibly nice guy.